Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. You're here with Karen and Curtis Herbert, and this is episode number 80.
Yes, it is.
Shocking, huh?
Yes, it is. And a listener I was speaking with listened to last week's episode, the one Barbie and You Are Perfectionists episode. And he said, I enjoyed it. It was good. I was wondering how you were going to pull those two themes together.
Just had to wander around a little bit.
Yeah. So all I can say is, hey, friend, you are enough, I guess. So Karen's looking at me. What? I didn't watch the movie. Don't make inside jokes. That's annoying. And Karen, in the last week, moving right along, since we recorded that episode, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
About a book entitled Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic.
Ooh, that sounds right in line.
Well, right. And it's a book about young people. And there's just this culture, according to the book, in middle class, upper middle class families, an achievement culture for young people. It's all the tests and the studying and childhood spent sprinting towards high grades, admission to elite schools, and other rewards that in the end might not be so rewarding. So they have a composite character, Amanda, a hardworking teenager. She's excelling at school. She's a pianist, a varsity athlete, an honor student. She gets early acceptance to a great university. She gets the right internships. She graduates, gets a great job, and boom, she's a mess. She's hit all the marks, but it's not working for her.
It's so funny that you bring this up, Curtis. I feel like I've talked to several people recently who basically ran that story in their life and were extremely successful from the outside perspective. And they hit a wall and felt like, what is all this for? What's the purpose? Where's my meaning? It's not satisfying me. And really had to take a hard look at what they were doing and why they were doing it.
It is a script almost.
Yeah.
For our culture, especially in certain parts of it. And I think there's not a simple answer.
Right.
And simply to pray it away or to yoga it away or to exercise it away, any of these silver bullets, well, life's not so simple. To the question of what creates human flourishing, and flourishing in the context of living in the kingdom of God as Christians. Our whole podcast in some ways is dedicated to that question.
I agree. And I think one of the things that I took away from last week was that sometimes these pervasive influences can really be the air we breathe, such that sometimes we don't even notice how we're being influenced.
Yes, and we were calling that socially derived perfectionism. And we're looking at these, you're using the lens of perfectionism to capture just kind of these categories of beliefs that aren't helpful, that maybe are unconscious or we've internalized and we think they're so true, they're driving us, but actually you bring them up to the light and you look at them and you think, why am I buying into this?
Right.
And in using the lens of perfectionism, there's a couple other categories. So we talked a lot about socially derived perfectionism. And we talked a little bit about helicopter parenting, which is pertinent to Amanda's story. There's these other two categories. It's the self-directed perfectionism that's directed at ourselves, by ourselves, and other-directed perfectionism. That's our perfectionism reaching out to touch someone nearby.
to give them a gift.
Yes.
So the self-directed perfectionism, is that pretty much like what I would normally think of as a perfectionist? Somebody who's probably very capable and skilled and has really high standards for themselves and doesn't want to fail and beats themselves up when they fail and just can never feel like they're enough or doing enough.
Right. That's what we usually think of. And some of the key points there are that really critical self-evaluation, that self-flagellation.
Right.
That not settling for anything less than perfect. And I liked the Amanda story, but it's kind of a bridge from the cultural or socially derived, we're receiving it, to the self-directed. So Amanda has internalized all of that.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And now she's really addressing herself with that perfectionism lens.
Yeah, and she's a mess. And some signs, other signs of self-directed perfectionism, taking outcomes personally. So the thing I'm trying to do isn't working. It's not going right. And I'm going to take it personally.
Like something's wrong with me.
Yeah, something's wrong with me because this thing I'm trying to do isn't working. I should be able to do this. I should know how to do it. There's no excuses. And so all of a sudden, I'm bad. I'm a failure. I'm not trying hard enough. If I just tried harder with a little more work, sacrifice, blood, sweat, toil, grit, and perseverance, I would get there.
Well, that's really interesting. One thing I feel like I've noticed is that with this kind of perfectionism, people really, if they think they're going to fail, they won't even try it. They feel less than totally confident. They just won't even attempt the thing because the danger is you're going to fail and then you'll feel that way.
Absolutely. And sometimes when you can't not do the thing, you start up with the avoidance.
Yeah.
And this is often a sign of a full-blown perfectionist is the avoidance. And if they can't avoid it, then the procrastination and the waiting till the last deadline, redoing things until finally it can't be delayed anymore and the thing goes out.
Yeah. So with perfectionists, do you think they're going to have that thought trap, the one we talked about in the thought trap season around the all or nothing thinking? You're either great at it or it's a disaster.
Yeah, that would be a good one for perfectionists. And that's why all those little details are so important. And that's why we're going to spend so much time on this little detail because it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
And just to continue in this vein, a huge sign of perfectionism is a lack of compassion for yourself. You make a mistake, you beat yourself up, you berate yourself. Oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe, how would I do something that's stupid?
So you're creating a lot of shame, really.
Yeah.
Instead of compassion.
Yeah. Well, isn't that motivating?
No, actually, the research says it's not motivating.
It creates fear that might get me moving, but really it's not making me better at what I'm trying to do. And this is part of what's so hard to convince perfectionists that, this really isn't helping you. Creating anxiety to get yourself to do something, that's not a winning strategy. Anxiety is really a performance killer. I mean, you tolerate a certain amount, it's fine, but quickly it becomes unhelpful. And at high levels, it becomes very unhelpful.
This is making me think of a conversation I actually had very recently with someone who recognized a certain level of anxiety and didn't want to let it go because they felt like it was serving them in some way not to make certain mistakes. And it wasn't worth it to them to release the anxiety and maybe make some mistakes and move through them.
Well, they need a better strategy. They have a poor strategy and it's costing them a lot. Maybe if they switch strategies, they might see a little dip. Although the reality is they probably feel so much relief.
Right.
They'd go through this crazy phase of happiness before they real life settle back in. But how about other strategies like cultivating your curiosity or determination? Kind of I get knocked down, I get back up again. Get knocked down, get back up again. Which is a really old meme.
It is.
We were
I
singing
remember
it
the
to our
song,
kids, and the kid was like, "Oh man, that's so old and lame." We're like, "No, it's a new song." Okay, it's 80s. But other strategies: perseverance, a desire to grow. Accepting it as learning. Humor can be a good strategy in the right place. Making it a game. What have you?
Yeah. So what's the other directed perfectionism then? Is it pretty much all of this stuff only turned outward into expectation for other people?
Right. So you've got perfectionism for you and perfectionism for the person next to you. Isn't that great? You can take your unrealistic standards and apply them to your friends.
You could share the love around.
Share the love. You can evaluate others when they're not perfect. You can be really harsh with them. And this is very telling, actually, I think, is when you're really critical of others, this is perhaps some perfectionism holding them to an unrealistic standard of being perfect, being quick to find fault. That can be part of this perfectionism.
One thing I have noticed, Curtis, is sometimes when we have our own insecurities underlying our own perfectionism, that can come out as a way of evaluating and noticing and being critical of other people.
Yes, I think there's a connection there. When I'm insecure and anxious and want everything to be perfect, I'm going to project that right on you. I'm going to be on you. Don't want you to make a mistake. I want you to do it just right. I'm likely to micromanage you. Micromanaging is a big sign of perfectionism. People aren't working up to my standards. It's never going to be as good as I could do it. These are some of your thoughts as a perfectionist. And something that I think comes with perfectionism is it starts to creep into this judgment of character. So-and-so, they're not just not doing their job. They're lazy. They're bad. And you'll notice that most of the workplaces you've ever worked in your life, it's run on a shame and blame system. So people make mistakes. It's not just that they're not doing well or having trouble or need some extra help or whatever it is. It's they're bad. You mess that up. You're a bad person, and I'm going to shame you because you should be ashamed when you're a bad person. And we're all going to run on this basis.
I like the principle that I've been working with lately. It's one of many, but it's people are not their behaviors. There's this distinction between people and their behaviors. And very, very often we conflate those two. And we start to see behaviors and we put them in the identity or the personal category. And that's a really important distinction, I think. And we have to work at it to keep those two separate, to look at behaviors and maintain our integrity in our perception of the person and separate them from their behaviors. Otherwise, I think we get exactly what you just said, was conflating into judgments about the character of the person versus being able to see behavior and behavior change as possible.
People are not their behaviors. So that's a great way for so many reasons to avoid needless judgment, to remember that, well, hey, their behavior can change, even if people really don't change, not at an appreciable rate.
Yeah. And if I have the self-directed perfectionism, maybe to try saying, look, I am not my behavior. I am not this particular achievement.
Right,
I'm not this outcome in this area. There's a distinction.
And people are not their behaviors. That can be encouraging when I'm trying to set some boundaries.
Right.
So I can just talk to you about your behavior and we can maybe get it to a place that works for me better without me having to, take you on. And so it's such a great principle, and our workplaces, it's pretty hard to get away from the shame and blame. And it's interesting how this is handled with different degrees of sophistication. So it can be hidden under layers of so-called professionalism. However, you'll quickly learn if something's going wrong at the organization, the blame is being passed around. And you don't want it to land on you. You're going to be artful and play some politics to get it to keep rolling down the hall to someplace else. And that's life in the big city.
Yeah, it seems to me like a recipe for never actually addressing problems and getting good solutions.
Yeah, well, so often the conflicts start at the top, and the lack of resolution there just passes them down through the organization. However, we are digressing.
Well, actually, we were digressing. And the next question I was going to ask might not be a digression, if you think of it. I was going to say, does this even creep into our own life in the church sometimes?
There you go. Okay. So I did look around on the internet just for some things. I found an interesting article by this Reverend Will Vanderhart, who's a church leader. He's in the Anglican Church, apparently. And it's just an internet article. And I thought it was interesting as somebody who's been in the clergy and working with church leaders to get his perspective. And he wrote, issues of perfectionism start to take hold in a church leader's life when they sense the need to prove their vocation to leadership through their performance in leadership. And so they start off on this never-ending cycle of activity against some unknown benchmark. And here's what really got me. It said, there's no marker for the point at which you have done enough, and Christian ministry has no perimeters to contain our activity, and over-sacrifice is near universally celebrated.
I do feel like that's true. Over-sacrifice is near universally celebrated. And a lot of times there aren't the kind of boundaries that really protect real, true flourishing, like you were talking about earlier.
So Jesus died for our sins, but you won't stay late and finish this project?
I feel like you're manipulating me, honey. Somehow. I just don't have a good retort.
Well, it's this wonderful, beautiful sense of service and wanting to do more and impact more. However, there doesn't seem to be a limit. There's no perimeter. There's no fences around it unless you start to create them.
Yeah. I wonder if it's not just the pastors who have sort of these unrealistic expectations, but the people in the church who have them about the pastor or the pastor and the staff or what the people
Well,
at the church should be
absolutely.
doing.
So as soon as you're in any kind of leadership in these church organizations, you become the target of criticism because you're not just whatever. Pretty much anything you do is going to have its detractors. We certainly see this with the parish priests who are at the focal point often of our criticism. And Vanderhart's remarked is, well, despite the church being full of kind and supportive people, leaders rarely receive objective affirmation. And most of them at some point are going to feel intimidated or bullied by a minority of members of their parish or congregation. So that seemed about right to me, us being perfectionistic in our demands of our leaders. And that's the thing about the church and our relationship with God. It's all very personal, and so we get all these things wrapped together, and the result isn't always the best. Here's a question. Do you think that the church leaders can be perfectionistic in the expectations of their congregations or helpers?
Oh, interesting. So, I'm really serving very hard right here, and you as an active church member, I expect you to give back. Something like that?
Something like that.
I think that can happen. I feel like so many of our beautiful, serious, mission-oriented communities, we're doing beautiful things, and often we're doing so much, and we may not have the people to actually be doing all of that. And so it's very easy, even as a member of communities, to get burnout on what's expected.
Okay, so once you're showing up, then, oh boy, we need more of you.
And there's so many beautiful, talented, skilled people in our communities that understandably we're so grateful to have them there. And yeah, I do think that every individual has to work through where their boundaries are and where their priorities are and what they're being called to in reality. And it's very hard as a Christian to say no sometimes.
Yeah.
And yet very, very important.
Karen, perfectionism, it's a big topic. Not sure we're going to solve it here in our 20 minutes or what have you.
I don't have that high of an expectation for us, honey.
It doesn't have to be.
Luckily.
Perfect. That's perfect, honey. I think this is all falls under this category of we can lead ourselves the best when we bring a great energy, great positive energy to our life, to our Christian life, when we bring out the virtues and our talents and skills in a way that's very positive, that we're making the best of what we have. That's a lot of what bringing our contribution to the world is. That's a lot of flourishing, is simply taking out a lot of these negative habits, these bad habits, things that come from our culture, or they're self-directed, or we're flinging them out at other people. We can have a better experience in our life. We can do more if we let go of all these negative motivational strategies.
You know, Curtis, one of the big antidotes to perfectionism is self-compassion.
There you go. Ding, 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 ding.
Yes, one of the reasons we love self-compassion so much. And just to let our listeners know, it is heading into the fall here, and we will be bringing back our self-compassion courses this fall. If you're already interested, send us an email and we can give you some more details as they become ironed out.
That email is thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com. That's thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.